The Black Ship Side Story, Barony of Screaming Forests, Day 4. Waking up early was becoming a habit that Wyatt wished he did not have. It was a little after 6 in the morning when he woke. He figured someone, a baker, or maybe a cook preparing the food, had probably dropped something, or maybe a door had slammed. He got up, looking out of his bedroom window as he did so. It was drizzling outside. Having washed and dressed, this time in his armor, he went down to the kitchens. He wanted to thank the cooks for their hard work, and first thing in the morning, before the rush, seemed like the best time to do so. He stood in the kitchen entrance watching them hard at work. Eventually one of them looked up, a young man. "Good morning, sir," he said, causing several of the others to look up and offer their greetings. The young cook said, "We're not quite ready to serve food yet, sir. Give us 5 minutes." Wyatt held up a hand, saying, "Not a problem, I can see you are all hard at work. I just wanted to thank you all for all of that hard work. Also, I was wondering, last night I was given some cordial. I thought it would be nice to fill my water bottle with it today, that is, if you have any to spare." The young man came over to Wyatt, saying, "Plenty of cordial, sir. If you leave your water bottle here with us, I'll bring it out with your breakfast. Just give me 5 minutes." Wyatt handed the bottle over, saying, "No hurry, I'll go see how they are doing over in the bakery. Please take your time." Leaving the kitchen, Wyatt walked out of the front of the inn and over to the bakery. There he once again thanked everyone, and seeing that they had a large basket of various rolls, he offered to take it back to the inn. Leaving the bakers to get on with their work, he returned with the bread basket, taking it to the dining room. He was going to take it through to the kitchen, but the same young man he'd spoken to less than 10 minutes earlier asked him to just set it down on the central table and help himself to breakfast. He left Wyatt's now-filled water bottle on a small table in the corner. While Wyatt made his selection, he had to admit that the cooks had done a really good job, preparing a healthy and enjoyably tasty breakfast that supplemented the standard supplies with locally sourced foods, all of which had been tested by the doctor. As Wyatt waited for others to appear, he used his datapad to make notes. They were going out further today, initially to the small group of buildings about 10 kilometers away in the middle of the forest. Then he planned to visit the other village on the northern shore of his lands. He shook his head. His land, he could not believe it, but there was a lot to do, and he still wasn't sure how he was going to do it. He thought about how Declan had reacted to the Drazen yesterday and made another note, then sat and waited for everyone else to arrive. Declan was first, arriving just 10 minutes later. Wyatt told him, "We're going out in the shuttle today. Have your men fully armed, just in case, but I need you to leave the driver from yesterday. I think that was Private Shatterbolt here. I have another job for him." As usual, Declan's reply was a simple, "Yes, my lord." When Ino came in a few minutes later, Wyatt greeted him. "Good morning, Ino. I would like you to do the same sort of things you were doing yesterday. But today I need you to have a look at the restaurants, inns, pubs, maybe the school, and the barracks. Anywhere a large number of people can sit and eat a meal together. It will be weeks, if not months, before we can acquire kitchen appliances for everyone. So we need to be able to feed everyone in big groups. We should, I think, have enough cooks, but we need more space to allow everyone to sit and eat inside." Ino nodded. "Okay, Wyatt, but surely we will have to wait just as long for new appliances for those restaurants." Wyatt smiled. "I don't think so." General Swallowtail mentioned that one thing they had been building was barracks. Soldiers need to eat, so there is actually a supply of professional-grade cooking equipment. I asked, and he said that yes, they can supply it. It was Ino's turn to smile now. "Ah, I think I understand," he said. "While we are waiting for all the new kitchen equipment for the homes to arrive, we can feed everybody in the restaurants, even afterwards, I guess. With 1,500 kitchens to do, at say 1 hour per kitchen, that's still a good 15-man days of work, even if everyone does 10-hour days." Wyatt agreed. "Yes, but they will be looking after themselves. I think we can count on people to do that." He suddenly thought of something else. Cooking lessons. I am only guessing, but I expect a fair number of people won't be able to cook for themselves. We need to run some lessons to show people how to do that. Ino looked confused and said, "But we don't have any teachers. How are we going to teach people how to cook?" Wyatt kept his smile. "The same way most commoners learn to cook, our parents or friends show us how. Here we have professional cooks, we will ask them to give basic lessons." Ino opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Finally, he just said, "Oh," and that was that. As Wyatt started to get up, he remembered one more thing, saying, "Ino, Maybe you could see if anyone can get one or more of the electric vehicles running. If nothing else, it will make it easier to transport stuff around town." Ino just nodded, and Wyatt went to find Sergeant Major Starrant. It did not take him long. The sergeant was ensuring his men and women were all getting a good breakfast. Wyatt went up to him, saying, "Sergeant Major, it has come to my attention that not everyone knows how to kill a Drazen, since there are still some running about on the planet causing trouble. I will make this part of your responsibility. To this end, I'm going to suggest you get enough men to fill up the APC, grab some ropes and chains, maybe a net from down at the harbor, and go and pick up the one I shot yesterday, Private Den Shatterbolt. The driver of the APC knows where to go. I suggest you find a spot. Best make it just outside of town, where you can bring your people to see it before it starts to rot. If you shoot it in the brain, as I did yesterday, then they go down really quickly and don't get a chance to attack you." Sergeant Major Starrant saluted, said, "Very good, sir," and went back to organizing his troops. Wyatt made some sandwiches and discovered that there was indeed apple cake, as promised the previous night. Then he let everyone else have their breakfast and get ready before gathering his team and going to the shuttle. Once everyone was on board, he set off for the group of buildings in the middle of the forest. From the images that had been gathered, he knew there should be enough open space beside the small lake to the west of the buildings for the shuttle to be able to land. But when he arrived, he had to rely on the shuttle's sensors to find a suitable spot, as a heavy mist lay over the lake and surrounding grassland to a depth of about a meter, making a purely visual approach impossible. As Wyatt climbed down from the shuttle into the waist-high mist, he had the strangest feeling that he was being watched. But a visual sweep of the area revealed nothing, so he had Declan assemble the team. Addressing them, Wyatt said, "This shouldn't take long. There are fewer than a dozen buildings. Let's go and have a look, see what's here, and then move on to the village on the northern coast. Any questions?" The mechanic, Wyatt remembered his name was Bruce, raised a hand and looked towards Wyatt, saying, What's that?" as he pointed past Wyatt towards the forest. Coming slowly towards them, almost gliding through the mist, was an enormous white stag. Elizabeth said, "Everyone moves slowly towards the buildings. They generally are not dangerous, but they can be, especially if they are startled, so nice, smooth movements." The nearest buildings were only 100 meters from the shuttle, and almost everyone quickly made their way over to the nearest one. It was only when they got there and Elizabeth turned around that she realized Wyatt had stayed behind watching the stag. As Elizabeth and the rest of the party watched, the stag slowly walked through the mist, coming right up to Wyatt. It was huge. Its shoulders were easily higher than the top of Wyatt's head, large even for Hago, and the antlers must have been almost 2 meters across, with a set of wickedly sharp-looking points at the tips. Wyatt stood, his left hand resting lightly on one pistol as the great stag approached him. He'd not realized initially just how huge the beast was, yet it did not seem to be hostile, just curious. It paused, no more than an arm's length away from Wyatt, then it slowly lowered its head to look Wyatt in the eye. 100 meters away, everyone stared at the strange sight, watching as the stag lowered its head to look Wyatt in the eyes, and then watching Wyatt lift his right arm and gently stroke the head and neck of the stag. After just over a minute, the stag turned around and then swiftly walked back into the forest, vanishing in the mist. Wyatt walked over to the rest of the group. Well, that was unexpected. "Nice, but unexpected," was all he said. Nobody said a thing at first, but it did not pass unnoticed that Wyatt's armor bore a winged white stag on the chest. After a while, Elizabeth had to ask, "Why did you just stay there? That stag could have killed you." Wyatt considered his answer before replying, "He could have killed me just as much as I could have killed him, but I didn't feel any hostility from him. I think he just wanted to see what had made all the noise, maybe also to look at me, though I don't know why. It almost felt like he was welcoming me. It was a very odd feeling. I found myself just wanting to reach out and touch him. When I did, he just let me. Once he was satisfied, I think he just decided that I was okay and went back into the trees." Elizabeth turned to Wyatt, the lack of color on her face betraying her calm expression. "White stags are almost legendary creatures on Hago. They are really rare, and the large ones, like that, are powerful beasts, more than capable of killing one or more men if angered with ease. Killing one is said to always bring bad luck, but I have no idea what having one allow you to pet it means." Wyatt thought for a moment before replying, It means nobody is allowed to kill any white stags in the Barony. I'm not superstitious, but I don't know your customs. Better to be on the side of caution, he thought a little longer and added. Also, when we cut trees for timber, we don't clear huge areas. We preserve the environment, he said, looking at the forester he had brought with him. We can do that, right? The young man looked at Wyatt before slowly replying, Yes, sir, I believe so. It's called sustainable forestry. It's not as profitable in the short term as clear-cutting, but it creates a sustainable forest, often with a positive long-term benefit. Wyatt asked him, What's your name? The young man replied, Fritz Hohenberg, sir. So, Fritz, do you know how to go about such a thing? Wyatt asked, continuing with, You're what, not yet 30? Have you got the experience? Fritz straightened up at this, replying, Sir, I am 28 years old. I've been running around in the forests since I was 5 or 6. My family have been foresters and woodsmen for more than 30 generations on many different worlds. I can do the job, but... He paused, carefully considering his next choice of words in front of his lord. But I do not know the native plants and animals of this world, sir. What's the best tree for timber or firewood? What dangers might I find out there? He said, waving his hands to indicate the forest that surrounded them. Wyatt smiled. Neither do I, Fritz. Fortunately, Elizabeth here is our local expert. She's going to help by creating a guide for you. Isn't that right, Elizabeth? Elizabeth was shocked. What guide? I don't know. I'm not an author. I don't know how to... I've never written a guide. Where do I even start? Wyatt looked at her. I've seen your notebooks. You can write. Everything is clear and well presented. You just need some extra help and guidance, putting that into a book. I am fairly sure that amongst the 1,550-odd people, we will have some who can help turn your notes into a digital guide. Maybe we can add photographs to your pictures, perhaps even produce some posters. He added a note to his datapad, get a big printer before continuing. I know you have the ability and I'm not alone. I showed those pictures I took of your notebook to my friends. They know far more about such things than I do, and they were very complimentary about your work. Elizabeth was turning a distinctive shade of red, with embarrassment at the praise Wyatt gave her, but she replied, I can certainly help point out the different uses for the local trees, and which plants and animals to avoid. Wyatt grinned. That's all I'm asking for, he said. Well, the guidance for the townsfolk on what native plants and animals are good to eat and what should be avoided, the art classes for the children and looking after the park. Speaking of which, Fritz, there will, I am sure, be times when conditions are such that working deep in the forest felling trees might not be practical. When you have time, Miss Elizabeth here will need some help trimming and felling trees in a park she is going to restore. I would be grateful if you and your men could give her some assistance. Fritz nodded. Of course, sir. Wait a moment, my men. There's just me, sir. I have no men. Wyatt carried on. Oh, but you do, Fritz. You are, as of now, my head forester. There are something like 30 foresters and woodsmen amongst those that are coming here, or at least that's what they claim. Your job will be to come up with a plan. I'll lend you some help to organize everything, but as we look around, I want you to make notes. You will need equipment, safety gear, machinery, saws, axes, and so on, plus spare parts, maybe a mechanic to help repair stuff, everything you need. Wyatt pulled out a notepad and a couple of pencils from a pocket, handing them to Fritz. Just write it all down. If you are not sure of anything, ask. I won't get angry if you ask about something you don't know, but I will be annoyed if you do something stupid, because you didn't ask about something you don't know. Fritz took the notepad and pencils and began making notes immediately. They carried on into what Wyatt thought was probably a forestry hamlet. It was too small to be a village. To the right of the road, set back about 10 meters, were a series of 8 small single-story buildings, spaced a few meters apart from each other with a wooden platform, about 1 meter off the ground, running across the front of each, connecting them to each other, and linking to a larger building to the west. The wooden walkway had stairs leading up from the ground at several locations and was covered by a wide roof, but it was open-sided, extending above a set of balcony rails that were only interrupted by the openings for the stairs. Some of these smaller buildings had simple wooden tables and chairs outside. Wyatt led them all to the nearest set of stairs. Each of the 8 smaller buildings was identical. A stone base served as a platform on which the wooden log structure stood. Shutters covered windows to either side of a solid wood door. Inside was a simple room with a stone fireplace in the back corner, 4 single beds, each with a wardrobe and a bedside cabinet with drawers. 4 chairs and a table sat near the fireplace. On the back wall in the opposite corner to the fireplace, a second door led to a small extension, which held a simple bathroom. Each of these bunkhouses was almost identical. The only differences were that in some, a picture was hung on a wall or a rug was on the floor, little home comforts for those who stayed there. The last building was much larger. As with the smaller cabins, the doors had no locks on, though they did have a couple of strong bolts on the inside, making them all easy to enter. The front door led through an enclosed porch into the main building. Inside, a large dining area was laid out with seating for up to 50 people. Wyatt left the majority of the party there to have a good look around, taking Declan, one of his men, along with Fritz and Bruce to inspect the last 3 structures, which were massive buildings. The first building was about 100 meters in length and perhaps 20 meters across. Along one long side were large roller shutter doors, and at the other end was a simple, person-sized wooden door that they used to enter. Inside was very dim. In the roof, there were some translucent panels that allowed some daylight in, but the large machines inside cast lots of shadows. It smelt of old oil, dust, and dirt. Wyatt walked over to the first roller shutter door, released the bolts, and pulled on the chains. Slowly the door opened, letting more light into the building. He and Declan then did this to the next 9 doors, allowing the daylight to flood in. Inside were an assortment of vehicles. Firstly, 2 large log-hauling trucks with their trailers. Judging by the rust and dents over most of their bodies, not to mention the flat tires, they were in a poor state. In the next 2 bays, a pair of trailers sat hard on the rims of their wheels. Sitting on the first trailer was a bulldozer. Behind it was a second tracked vehicle that Wyatt had not seen before. There was no cab. Instead, a remote control handset sat in a box next to it, along with what appeared to be several different mechanical heads. Fritz identified it as a remote-controlled tracked carrier. The other trailer held a tracked harvester, which Wyatt instantly recognized from his time at the sawmill as a youngster. Next was a large tractor with a small tree feller on a crane at its rear and a front loader arm. Several attachments stood nearby. Next were 2 identical forwarders, though these were significantly larger than the ones Wyatt had seen on Volantis, then 2 8-wheeled harvester vehicles, and finally a massive grapple skidder. At the end of the wall, another regular wooden door led through into a workshop. The workshop was well laid out with lots of spares stored on shelves and a vehicle inspection pit, clearly designed to accommodate the oversized forestry equipment. A large gantry crane built from large steel girders sat inside. It had metal wheels with solid rubber tires, and the signs on it indicated that it could lift 50 tons. Although just how one moved the crane, if it was loaded with 50 tons, Wyatt wasn't sure. Also inside was a large telehandler, up on blocks and partially disassembled. On one workbench, a manual lay open. Bruce examined the pages and looked around, finding more service instruction books for the other vehicles. Bruce pointed to the telehandler and said, "Well, I guess that's the first thing that needs fixing, otherwise we can't use the workshop for repairs." They spent an hour there while Bruce looked around, inspecting things. Eventually he came back to Wyatt with his report. "Could be worse, sir. The rubber tires all need replacing, probably most of the hydraulic hoses as well." "The hoses won't be a problem. The tools for making up new ones are in the workshop. I've got the sizes for the hoses. The tires to order, there's also a lot of spare new filters in the workshop, and I have a list of what's needed. These big machines were well looked after. They were put away clean and dry. There's no significant rust I can find on them anywhere. Drain off the fluids, give everything a good clean, and I reckon they will all run again. Not as good as new. Still, they should give you another 10 years without problems, maybe longer. The 2 trucks, though, are a different matter. I can probably get them running again, but you will need to replace them soon, maybe within a year, 2 at most." Wyatt groaned. More expense, he thought. Still, at least he would get working forestry vehicles out of it. "What sort of costs am I looking at?" Bruce rubbed his chin. "Well, sir, tires are not cheap. Most of them will be about 2,000 credits each. The big tractor tires and the ones on the front of the skidder probably double that. The ones on the trailers a bit less, and the truck tires say half that at most. And it's probably a good idea to have some spares. The filters and hydraulic hoses are not too expensive. It's the fittings that add up. Add in oil and grease, and I think you are looking at almost 200,000 credits, maybe 250,000. That's nothing, though. One of those logging trucks will probably cost you 750,000 credits. I've no idea what the other machines will cost, but many hundreds of thousands of credits each. so it's well worth the cost of the repairs. Wyatt just sighed. Still, he thought Bruce was probably right. Well, there were still 2 more buildings to look at. "Okay, let's move on," he said. They shut the roller shutters and moved on to the next building. The second building had large doors that were set in pairs. At each end of the building, which was about 80 meters long, 8 meters tall, and 20 meters wide, this barn was all but empty. But Wyatt already anticipated it might be. This was for drying the timber. In 15 minutes, they had examined each of the chambers and confirmed it. The barn was divided into sections by internal metal walls, each with insulation inside. Hot air could be directed in from above, and each section could be dried independently of the others. In Volantis, the hot air had come from an electric heating system. Here a furnace heated the air. Fans in the roof space circulated the warm air, or at least they would if there were any electrical power. Outside of the second and third buildings, a huge gantry crane still stood. Bruce carefully climbed the ladder to inspect the workings. It didn't take long. When he came down, it was with good and bad news. "The motor is seized solid, but everything else has a little rust on it, but should clean up easily enough. You just need a new control box and motor, and it's good to go," he said to Wyatt. He then added, "I don't know what that would cost, but I doubt it's more than 10,000 credits. Wyatt tried to smile at the small victory, but it wasn't going to be easy. As they made their way to the final barn, Wyatt's heart plummeted. A large section of the structure had been severely damaged a long time ago, judging from the state of the wooden walls. Still, it had to be checked out. Inside the barn lay the damaged sawmill. Wyatt recognized the feed mechanism at the start and a debarker. From there, the logs, up to 30 meters long, would have gone into the massive saw. But the saw was now just chunks of rusted scrap metal. Whatever had damaged the wall had clearly gone through and smashed into the traveling saw, shattering it. Wyatt guessed that it must have been a large piece of machinery, perhaps a logging vehicle, though none had shown any damage. Inside the barn, a collection of tracks lay in ordered pieces, just inside the first set of doors, and Wyatt tried to work out what it was for. Finally, with Bruce's help, they worked it out. These tracks had once started on the outside of the barn. The overhead crane outside could have loaded the logs onto the track, which would have then allowed the logs to be fed through the debarker. Once the bark was removed, the log would have been scanned before the saw was used to divide it into long slabs. On the other side of the saw, the slabs would have been transferred across to the second set of rails, where it could be fed through the edger to square up the timber. Then a vertical set of circular saw blades could slice the slab into narrower strips, and a cross saw would have sliced the wood to length before it was sent out the same end of the building it had come in through on a second external track. From there, it could have been fed into the timber drying process next door. Bruce looked at the various parts of the machinery, saying, "Look, it's not all bad. There's several different manufacturers of these bits, which suggests they can mix and match units. A lot of these bits look to be in pretty good condition. All you need is a new big saw, and I guess some other bits and pieces, and you can almost certainly get it running again." Fritz came out of a side office carrying an axe, holding it up, he said. "There's a lot of forestry tools in the office. Nothing wrong with things like the axes and wedges, good solid tools. The safety clothing and helmets need replacing, but you probably have more than enough basic tools. There's even a 4-meter-long 2-person crosscut saw in there. No chainsaws, though. Maybe someone took them, as there's a bunch of empty racks and spares in there." An idea was slowly forming in Wyatt's head, but he needed to be sure he wasn't being stupid. So he called over Bruce, Fritz, and Declan. "Gentlemen, I have an idea, but I'm not sure if I'm being crazy or if it's even practical, so I'm going to ask your opinions. Currently, to get the mill running, I'd need to rebuild this building, acquire a new large saw, reassemble the in-feed and out-feed rails, and install all new control circuitry, as the control cabin is currently buried under that pile of debris. Correct?" Everyone nodded their head or said yes, so Wyatt continued. "I'd also need to get some sort of generator out here to power everything, and then when the timber is cut, load it onto those 2 sorry excuses for log trucks, and send it down the road to Newtown to carry on processing, assuming the trucks can actually make it that far and back on a regular basis." Again, everyone agreed that was what he needed to do. So Wyatt pressed forward with his idea. "What if we don't rebuild it here? What if we build a new sawmill at Newtown? We'd probably have to take all the machinery in here apart anyway, just to get the new equipment in. So what if instead of building a new building here, we build it on the far side of the railway station? I was looking at the drying barn, and the walls all seemed to be bolted together and bolted to the floor. If we unbolted them, all we need is a new slab back in Newtown, and we can rebuild it, right? Bruce replied. Yes, sir. I think that should be fairly easy. Then all you do is load the logs onto the trucks and send them down the road. You could then get away with a small generator here, maybe even just solar power and batteries, lighting, cooking, and some power for the workshop is all that's required. Wyatt added his final touch. What if we don't use trucks to move the logs? There's a narrow-gauge locomotive in a shed back in Newtown. From the station in Newtown to here is fairly flat. It climbs maybe 100 meters over 10 kilometers. The loco should be able to manage that, and it would be going downhill carrying the heavy loads. I think we should still be able to go up to 30 meters for really big logs, or as a worst-case scenario, we can fly them in by shuttle. We keep the crane here for loading logs onto the train, and we work out how to offload them at the other end, possibly using another crane or simply rolling them off onto a platform. I'm not sure. But I think a train will handle the heavy log loads more easily than those trucks, and they won't get bogged down in the winter like the trucks probably will. The four men looked at each other as they considered Wyatt's words, nodding. It actually seemed to make sense. Wyatt and the others walked back to the lodge. He guessed it was something like an inn, where they had left the rest of the party. Everyone was out on the covered porch at the front of the building, mainly eating and chatting. They had grabbed some of the outdoor furniture and were sitting on it. As Wyatt ran up the steps, they started to rise. Wyatt called out, "As you were, no need to get up," then went and perched himself on the railing before he took out a sandwich and bit into it. When he had eaten the mouthful, he asked, "So who wants to tell me what we have here?" Ansel the builder got up and started to speak. "Well, sir, there's nothing wrong with the buildings here that I can find except there's no power. The little bunk rooms are all identical to each other except for decoration, and you could sum them up by saying they are a square log cabin with a small extension for a bathroom at the back. The bathroom has a small window that looks to the north. 2 windows either side of a good solid front door all look to the south. The shutters on every window were closed. That's probably kept the windows unbroken. The roof of each cabin is metal, I think aluminium, anodized bronze in color, and that sits on an insulated wooden roof. It extends out at the front to form a deep porch, shielding the windows from summer sun, but allowing the winter sun to enter. A single stone fireplace provides the heat. All the bunkhouses have a stone-walled base, ensuring good, solid construction that stays warm in winter and doesn't get too hot in summer. The larger building is a bit different. The porch, as you can see, is bigger for starters. You can easily seat 30 people out here under cover if you wanted to. Inside at this level, there's men's and ladies' toilets, a good-sized kitchen and the dining room, plus a small bar. You can seat 52 for meals. I counted the chairs, but it would be fairly packed. About 30 would be comfortable. Kitchen was cleaned before being shut down. I can't tell if anything still works, but it's nowhere near as worn as the one back in the Inn of Newtown. There's a walk-in cold store and a larder off of the kitchen, but again, no power. So I don't know if the cold store works. Also, off the kitchen is a small hallway with stairs leading both up and down and a small office. There's a lot of paperwork in the office. 30 years old. All looks to be bills for food supplies and income from feeding people. Downstairs, there's a basement. One room seems to be set up to feed the bar, with several pipes feeding from above and racks for, presumably, barrels to be set on. Other than that, it's 3 storerooms, plus a door to the outside that leads to a short staircase going up to ground level. Nice solid door again. One of the rooms in the basement is filled with spare furniture, mainly tables and chairs, as well as a couple of bed frames, all the same size as those in the bunkhouses. I think one of the other rooms was a store for food, possibly, but there's nothing there now. Upstairs, there are 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a sitting room, with shutters on all the windows, just as we see downstairs, and heavy timber doors. The roof here appears to be the same metal on an insulated wooden frame structure, just larger. Once we had looked around inside, we went to look outside. There's not much to report. I think there's probably a borehole or well nearby, but without a way to follow the water pipe, I wouldn't know where to look. I can tell you that 300 or so meters to the north, there's a natural wastewater plant. It's fenced off with a stainless steel chain-link fence, probably to keep animals out. These things don't need any power to run, so it will probably be fine. Perhaps the pipes need cleaning, but that's all. To the northwest, approximately 20 meters from the corner of the building, there's a concrete pad next to a fuel tank. The tank is empty, as is the concrete pad. Still, several electrical cables come up into a wooden box right next to the pad. I'm only guessing, but I expect there was a diesel generator or something similar in a container on that pad. When they shut down operations, they simply took the generator with them. Everything here is clean except for the office, like they just tidied everything up, took what they wanted but left everything else behind, get a new generator installed, possibly even a solar pack, and you should quickly see what still works. Wyatt looked at everyone before saying, "So what you are telling me is that you've done all you can. Everything looks good, but we won't know for sure until we have power. So bring a generator, an electrician, a plumber, and a drain expert next time we come here?" A mixture of nods, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, Wyatt," was what he got as replies. Wyatt added the notes to his datapad and then said, "Okay, back to the shuttle then. We've done what we can here." As he got up to lead the way back, he turned to Fritz. "Any thoughts yet?" he asked. Fritz looked at his notes before replying, "Several, sir. Electricity will be our first priority. We can't do a lot of work on the machines until we have that. I could see evidence of tracks going into the forest, but those tracks were heavily overgrown. We will need to fell those young trees, grind the stumps, and get in lots of chippings to form new paths, and given the comments about possible Drazan in the area, I would feel much safer if we had some soldiers here for added protection. Once we have power, a team of mechanics to get the vehicles working is probably our first priority. I don't need many foresters until then, just 2 or 3 with some chainsaws and brush cutters to clear the immediate area around the buildings. That timber will likely be not much good for anything except firewood, but we can cut it and stack it so it dries out ready for winter." Wyatt listened and nodded in understanding until they got to the shuttle. Once everyone was on board, he took off and headed north. In the shuttle, there was no time to reach cruising speed. The 12 kilometers took less than a minute to cover. In fact, the takeoff and landing took longer than the flight itself. The first thing Wyatt noticed as they approached his northern village was the large stone wall that protected the landward side of the village. It stood 3 meters tall on the outside with a walkway about 1 meter lower on the inside. The wall was almost 1.5 meters thick. There was a set of substantial gates barring access from the outside, which meant Wyatt had to find a spot to land within the village. Here there was a cobbled square, just large enough and clear of trees and debris for him to put the shuttle down, so, watching his sensors, he carefully landed with only a few meters clearance all round. As he climbed down from the cockpit, he winced as he looked at the damage the exhausts had caused to the building behind. A number of tiles were missing, and most of the windows were blown inwards. Oops, he thought, that was a little too close to really be safe. Next time, bring a ladder. As his passengers got off the shuttle, they were rather surprised to find themselves in the middle of the village, but it was Elizabeth who was the first to ask why. Wyatt beckoned them, saying, "Come with me," as he led them to the wall. When they got to the wall, he turned to Elizabeth and said, "In Julius's name, what requires a wall that size to keep it out?" Elizabeth's first words were, "Oh shit, Razor Claws! But they're not supposed to live this far to the west." Wyatt had no idea what she was talking about. "And what are razor claws?" Elizabeth looked at him as if he were stupid before saying, "You know what a lizard is?" Wyatt replied, "There's a reptile, we have them on Volantis, 30 to 50 centimeters long, small, sharp claws and teeth, 4 legs and a tail that's half the total length, good at climbing, eats small birds and large insects." Elizabeth laughed at him before saying, "Oh, if only they were that size here." A razor claw can be described in one word, predator. It grows up to at least 4.5 meters long. The tail is about 1/3 of the body length. They are covered in thick fur, 7 to 10 centimeters long. The adults weigh at least 300 kilograms and often more. She made a hand motion and continued. They have jaws that can open large enough to grab a man by the torso. They are powerful enough to bite through that torso in a single chomp. Claws up to 15 centimeters in length, teeth up to 5 centimeters. If they lose a tooth, well, no problem. They will grow new ones. Then she winced slightly. They can run for half an hour at 30 kilometers per hour. A fast man can outrun them over a short distance, but if you are out in the open, You are dead because they hunt in packs. They can't climb, though. At best, they can go up on their hind legs and maybe reach 2 meters off the ground. Oh, and they are dreadful swimmers. If they fall in deep water, they will try to paddle towards the nearest land before the weight of their wet fur drags them under. Wyatt raised an eyebrow as his mouth opened slightly, growing ever more disturbed by the creature's description. Elizabeth shrugged. But like I said, they are not supposed to live this far west. I've never seen a live one. I've only seen a few pictures. Some of my father's men were out on an exercise once when a pack attacked them. They were in an APC. The damn things are stupid but aggressive as hell, I guess. Not a very big brain, and what they have is enclosed inside their thick skull like natural armor. My father's men shot at one with their rifles, and that seemed to just make it angrier. They had to shoot it with the APC's cannon to stop it. The good thing is they tend to stick well clear of human habitations. Once the village built the wall, they would, I'm sure, have moved to a new area. Wyatt went to the gate and drew the bar back that held it closed, opening it about 1/2 meter. He looked out, then he called out, "Declan, could I borrow you for a moment?" As Declan walked over, he called out to Elizabeth, "Are you sure of that?" Elizabeth replied with a fairly certain why. At which point Wyatt opened the gate a bit more. The front of the gate was covered in deep scratches, each some 3 to 5 centimeters deep, but those were not why Wyatt had asked for Declan's help. Caught in the upper steel hinge strap, some 2.5 meters above the ground, was a claw sheath. Wyatt cupped his hands and gave Declan a boost up to the point where he could pull out the sheath. Dropping back to the ground, Declan held it up like a trophy and said, "I think, Miss Elizabeth, that you might need to revise your information." The sheath in Declan's hands was almost 20 centimeters long.